Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to spend some time with me and watch the video. Always very grateful for that. And guys, today we're going to be talking about bass and current, and I really want to break a bunch of myths surrounding that, because I think there's a ton of myths surrounding how current affects bass, about how they're victims of current, which they're not. So we're going to get into that in today's video, because I've been dealing with current for over 50 years in bass fishing. Also, guys, a quick reminder, I think I talked about a couple days ago, Tackle Warehouse has got a bunch of really good sales on bait casting and spinning reels right now. If you guys are looking for a good deal on a reel, I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description. If you guys use and bookmark that link to buy a reel, it's a good way to support the channel. The channel gets a small percentage of the commission on that, and that's appreciated, and a big thank you from me and my family for everybody that's been doing that. Okay guys, here's the thing about it. I've been fishing for bass in and around current my whole life. When I very first started fishing for bass, it was in a little creek, talked about this before, called Turkey Creek, down by my house in Joplin when I was a little kid. And you know, when you're fishing a creek, you have to learn about current. And that's one of the first things I learned about fishing, is how current flows and eddies and everything like that affected where the fish were at. And it also affected different type of bottom structures, about, you know, where there was little potholes and where there was deeper water and shallow water. So I learned a ton about current by wading creeks for my first 4 or 5 years of my bass angling. And then when I started getting seriously into tournament fishing and I started traveling all over the country, I learned a ton about current, because literally I fish current in every shape and form you can imagine. I fish super swift current, like on the upper end of the Chattahoochee River, on the Lake Seminole, heavy current, all current through those Alabama River lakes, the TVA lakes, tidal rivers that have current that moves with the tide. Ton of experience with tide. And there's a lot of myths and misconceptions surrounding what bass, how they relate and how it affects them. The number one thing, guys, that I think that people have a misnomer about is that bass are victims to current. In other words, that bass try to avoid current at all costs, and they try to get into areas behind current at all costs. There's a bit of truth to that, and there's a bit of myth to that, because I have caught a ton of bass on the up current side of objects and the side current side of objects and on the down current side of objects. So that's really what I want to get into today, about how bass position in current and what you need to do to catch those bass. So here's the first thing that you have to realize when you're talking about current. Current is relative to the structure that it's affecting. In other words, some current can be created by like a bend in a river, where you have some type of a current flow. And when you have a bend in a river, a lot of times you'll have a washout and a pothole, where that current hits the bank hard. And then sometimes you have structures that are on the bank or in the water that act as current blocks. So, every single piece of lake, or every type of lake, the current is affected. The current affects bass differently depending upon the intensity of the current and the cover that the fish are relating to, the water visibility, a lot of different factors with that. So there's a lot of things that create current. If you've got a lake that doesn't have much current in it, wind can create current. And then you have different type of current flows based upon, like on a man-made reservoir, how much water is being drawn through the dam. Based upon the lake that you're fishing, this can be significant or minor, also based upon how hard they're pulling current. Then you have current that occurs all the time, like in a man-made river, in a natural river or a tidal river. A natural river, you've got a constant, consistent current flow coming. That current flow is affected by the water levels a lot of times. And on a tidal river, you have a constant ebb and flow of current coming from an incoming tide and an outcoming tide. So here's the thing about it. Here's some basic foundational principles you need to understand about current, which will clue you into where you need to fish at when you see the particular piece of cover. Now, let's take, for example, say there's a lay-down tree in the water, or there's a stump in the water, or there's a big rock in the water that's getting hit by current. Let's say, for example, wherever you're fishing, you've got, some type of a decent current, like maybe a 2-mile-an-hour current, something like that. A 2-mile-an-hour current is fairly significant amount of current. A 5 mile an hour current is an extremely hard amount of current, but a 2 mile an hour current is a significant amount of current. Here's what a lot of people realize. Let's picture this stump that's sitting in the water, out off the bank, maybe in 2 or 3 feet of water, and you've got some current hitting this stump. Now, most people have this preconceived notion that the bass are going to be behind the current, on the downside part of the current of that stump, and they're going to pitch their bait in there. And at times that does work, but that's not the case all the time. Because one of the things you don't understand is when you see that stump sitting in the water, all you see is the visible stump. You don't see what's underneath it. You don't see if there's a lay down log that's maybe 2 or 3 feet up in front of that stump, or you don't see if there's this washed out root wad underneath it that's creating some different type of current blockages, or, you know, allowing the current to filter off that stump better. You don't know what's there. So in a situation like that, when you see that stump in the water, I have literally caught bass on the upside part of that stump, behind the stump, in front of the stump, and behind, and you know, on the down current side of it. I've caught them everywhere around it. Don't assume just because the current is being blocked, you need to be in that eddy behind there. Now, if you're fishing a body of water that's got a pretty swift current, let's say, for example, you guys are fishing Lay Lake on the upper end of the river, and they start generating water where there's a tremendous amount of current. A situation like that, yeah, is when you got hard current and you've got nothing else in your way. Those fish are going to get tucked in behind the current quite a bit. So the point of the matter is when you're fishing a body of water that has current, you have to fish everything. Don't just fish the down current sides of those type of areas. Those are high percentage areas, don't get me wrong. You can catch a lot of fish in a current block situation, but you're also missing a lot of fish if you're not in and around that situation. Now, a couple of the techniques that work really good that I have found out when you're fishing current is that a lot of it, again, depends on the flow of the current. But if you've got say you've got a moderate amount of current, like you've got a 2 mile an hour current, on up to a swifter current, say a 4 mile an hour current, your best lures are always going to be some type of a bottom bait. You know, some type of a Texas rig bait, Texas rig creature bait, a jig, something that you can hop along the bottom. Because what you're going to find out when there's a decent amount of current, bass do not like to chase a lure very far. They don't like to come up on a lure in some type of a decent current. They tend to feed more on the bottom for whatever reason. So those are always going to be your best baits. It doesn't matter what time of year. It can be, if the waters can be cold, it can be warm, it can be anything in between there. You're always going to be doing better on some type of a bottom type bait. And most of the time I'm pitching and flipping something like, you know, anywhere between a 1/4 ounce to a 3/8 ounce sinker, depending upon how, you know, heavy the current is. That's going to be a big thing. Another thing about current, guys, is pay close attention to areas where the current makes an undercut bank. And what an undercut bank is, if you've never seen one, it's like a lot of times you'll have a bend in the lake or the river, and that bend, the constant, you know, pressure that the current hitting that bend, it will actually erode the bank out, and it'll make the water drop almost vertically straight off that bank. Anytime you have a bend like that with an undercurrent cut in there, that's a really good spot to pitch a jig or a Texas rig in, because those fish will tuck up underneath like the undercut and the roots on the bank. It's a really, really good place to catch them in. Another good, decent, lure to catch bass on in current is some type of a crankbait. Some type of a shallow to medium running crankbait. Fished right around those seams, those current seams are going to be really good. And this is another thing to pay close attention to. Let's say, for example, I'll take my wallet, for example. Say this wallet is a stump in the water. A lot of times, is behind, and the current's coming from this direction right here. So behind the stump here, you have a slack current. But what you're going to have is you're going to have the current seam a lot of times. And this current seam can be caused by, it could be a rock that's under the water or any type of a structure that causes a break or disturbance in there. And the current seam is the place right where the slack meets the current. So a lot of times, say for example, if this stump's in the water, you can come around and you can get your boat pointing up this way and cast your lure not into the slack area, but cast it right on the seam where that moving water hits the slack water. That is a high percentage area, if you want to catch them on a crankbait and that type of a deal. Main thing with it, guys, I guess as a big overview with it is, yeah, it is true that bass like to be out of the current sometimes, but most of the time they're going to be all over the place because, again, you don't know what's really down there. You don't know what it looks like underneath the water. You don't know how the structure on the bottom, as far as rocks or areas that's been washed out, are creating current underwater. Because what looks like to you, if you see that same stump in the water and it looks like to you that stump's getting hit on the front side hard by current, you don't know what it looks like underneath the water. There could be, again, something underneath the water that breaks that current that you're not seeing. So main thing about that is don't bypass those areas that have current on the upsides of it with it. So my favorite all-time current lure by far is a jig, like a 3/8 or a half-ounce jig, sometimes a 3/4 ounce if the current's really hard. I have caught so many fish in heavy current or moderate current on a jig that it's not even close. So that's my favorite technique. But anyway, guys, that's just sort of a basic foundation of it. Every lake is different. Every lake is different on how their fish react based upon the species of the bass, like if it's a spotted bass or a largemouth, if it's a tidal water, if it's different type of water clarity with it. Water clarity has a big part to play with it. So not one shoe fits all depending upon where you're at. So hope it helps out. We'll talk later.